This week on the Sustainable Ministry Show, we are fielding a couple questions that we've received recently regarding committees in your church. It's episode 37. Is Tweet Me a Verb? Well, hey, everybody, we are back again one more time, hanging out with Melissa Rao and Stephen Ingram. And today we're going to take some time to field a few questions that we've gotten from folks about committees. And it's one of the things we talked about. It sounds like prompted a few more questions to dig into the role of committees in ministry a little bit deeper. Melissa, you want to launch us off with one of those questions?
Sure, yeah. So I got an email from Pastor Jeff Kroondike. I think he's out somewhere in Michigan. And he said he really appreciated the last episode we did about committees and was just curious. So here's what he says. He said, "My question is, what steps should one take if the tasks between the meetings simply aren't getting done? There is grace, but I find that people resist joining teams in our church because they drag on and they often don't get anything done. How can I change the mentality of doing work during meetings to doing it in between meetings without that seeming even more overwhelming?" The email was so great. There's so many different themes in there. So I was just curious, what do you guys think? You got any good advice for Pastor Jeff?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have dealt with this in the consulting that you do, but I know I have. It can be so frustrating, especially to the team leader, but also to the people on the team who are getting things done. I know that's an incredibly frustrating piece that can grind a process to a halt. So this is a really good question. One thing I would, instead of trying to solve the problem immediately, I would try to figure out what the root of the problem is, because there's a reason why this is happening. Now, it could be a cultural problem, like maybe folks in this team or in this church aren't used to having deadlines. They're not used to following kind of procedure. Maybe they're not used to accountability in terms of what's expected of them. So there could be a number of things, but I would kind of work and try to figure out what's sort of the underlying root of the problem and see if we can deal with that. But on a more practical level, in terms of just maybe some solutions, one thing that I think could help committees out tremendously is to have a organizational hub that everybody kind of subscribes to and works from. One of the things that I use on my teams at the church I work at is a program called Asana. It's a task management or a team management tool. And we use it for projects we're working on. We use it for agendas. We use it for all sort of getting things done sorts of tasks that we do. One of the nice things I like about this, and there's a lot of programs, I'm not just supporting that one, it just happens to be the one I use. One of the things that I like about this program specifically is you can assign individuals to tasks. You can also assign due dates. It has areas where you can keep files and notes and comments, and all that's connected back to your email. So if I were to assign Melissa a task that was due in 2 weeks, it would shoot her an email. It will also shoot her a reminder saying, "Hey, you've got 1 week to get the task done. You got 5 days." Whatever we set up the reminder system on it. So that's another level of accountability, so everybody can see what everybody's supposed to do. The other one we've talked about is monkey management, and we've talked about that on a previous program, so I won't go into that. But I think a lot of times our tools can be, if we're not using the right tools or we're not using tools at all, I think we a lot of times set ourselves up for failure out of the gate.
Yeah, I love that, especially having the resource to help manage it. I think this transition is cultural too, right? And so whatever the reasons are behind it, it's going to take some real leadership to model what it would look like to do it differently. And so using Asana or something similar is a good way to start doing that. Making some personal contacts between meetings with folks and just engaging them and asking how the work's going. If there's some other support that they need, those are key pieces too, to model what it might look like to get the work done between the meetings. And then making sure that even, your chair people, the people who are leading those groups are doing the same thing, and their tasks are being followed through on. Some of it's just going to take some modeling, I think, and patience for that shift to take place. Because if it's happening in one committee in the church, it's probably happening in multiple committees in the church.
That's right.
I think you're right. I think there is grace that needs to be modeled and demonstrated. I love deadlines. I kind of want to echo what Stephen kind of said. I think deadlines are super important and they're really helpful. And it really comes down to an accountability piece. And so I always encourage committees to have the people running the meeting the really, really well thought out agenda. And sometimes we can put timelines, by each agenda piece. And somebody can be a timekeeper during the meeting and say, okay, friends, we've spent enough time talking about this. We need to move on. Nobody appreciates being at a meeting when they don't feel that they've been that productive, including you, the pastor, or the program director, etc. So having a chairperson run the meetings and making sure that he or she is indeed following up through those tasks throughout the month, I think is a really, really good thing. So I think that's how we answer the question. Did we not answer all the questions that, how can we change the mentality of doing work during the meetings to doing it in between meetings without that seeming even more overwhelming? You guys want to speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, that's got to start at the recruitment time. So if they're in a season or rotation where people are rotating in and out of the committees or whatever that looks like, I think we need to set that expectation at the time we're having the conversations before somebody said yes to being on the committee. That's where it begins. And then in a place like this where there's a transition that we're trying to take place with this committees, continually reminding them of here's the new place we're headed. Here's the new way we're trying to work together and garner some agreement in that direction for the committees is important too. But I think ultimately it begins in the recruitment season.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you got to do is part of it's just the leadership issue. Don't let it happen in the meetings. If someone starts to kind of chase a rabbit or starts to try to do the work, I think you got to set the standard and stop it, obviously with grace and with kindness, but stop it and say, hey, if that hasn't, if that's not already been done, let's not take care of it here because this meeting is to report, is to problem solve, obviously if you need to, but this meeting is not to do the work in that should have been done beforehand. And I think if you do that a few times in meetings, if you set that precedent with grace and with love, but set the precedent, I think folks will get the hint and begin to function in the new culture that you're creating.
Yeah, that's right. And it is a culture shift, so it's not going to happen immediately. Right. It's going to take some time and love and some grit to get there. So keep on fighting the good fight, and hopefully by the end of your next year, after modeling these meetings over the next 4 to 5, 6 months, maybe things will start feeling a little bit better. Yeah. All right. Thanks, y'all, for that. I'd like to jump to another email we got from somebody. I'm not necessarily sure where he's from. But he says, hey, Melissa, been listening to your podcast about committees. I'd love to ask you some questions. I'm starting a new ministry in my church on engagement, and my pilot committee is really great. But there's been a lot of learning and brainstorming that needs to happen before we even decided to start doing things. Right now, he's kind of struggling with moving the team from the kind of brainstorming thought to actual action. Let's see what he says. He says he can't get them to focus on the tangible stuff. So he asks, should we even be focusing on numerous tangible things? Sounds to me like this committee, he's trying to get started off the ground, and maybe they've been doing a lot of brainstorming, but they haven't necessarily made the good shift to doing the work. So I'm just curious if you guys have any good insight for this pastor.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot of times, especially if a committee is formed without a very solid job description and mission, a lot of times the committee ends up spending the first couple of months figuring out why it's meeting, what it's doing, and kind of narrowing that down. So that could be some of it. I don't know if maybe the mission of the committee was stated clearly enough that maybe they were still working through that. The other thing that can happen is now a lot of times committees will get together. They work so hard. They want to gather all the research, and especially depending on what type of person you have on the committee, they'll work so hard to gather all the research, all the information, all the surveys, everything you possibly can. And they'll have this massive pile of data and information, and then they become paralyzed because they either want more information or they are trying to create something perfect. And so one of the things you have to say to the committee from the beginning is whatever we decide, whatever we try to put into play, it's not going to be perfect. Everything that we put out of this committee is a beta test. Every single thing we're beta testing. And we just know that when we put a beta test out there, that some parts are going to work, some parts aren't, and we're going to have to evolve and tweak as we go. And so don't let folks get caught up in this idea of creating something perfect, because it's just not going to happen. And if you can release them from that, give them permission to create imperfect things, and with the knowledge up front that we're going to have to come back, that this is only a beta test and we're going to tweak and rework this as we go. A lot of times it's easier to not get stuck on that sort of thing. I would actually recommend a book on this. It's actually a philosophy for how you do this sort of thing, how you prototype and beta test. It's called Theory U. And let me see, I'm going to grab it real quick. Here we go. It's by a guy named Otto Scharmer. And it is lessons for how you create new ideas, new systems. It talks about beta testing, prototyping, all that good stuff. It's really thick. If you don't want to read it, you can find all kinds of good synopsis and just kind of what that means. So, but really, really powerful, helpful stuff.
Love that. How about you, Bryant?
Yeah, the thing that stands out too is when those pieces aren't in place. You know, I think we know what those committees turn into, kind of advisory groups or idea generators, and you don't want to get bogged down in that. So the clarity that Stephen's speaking of and making sure that that's in place for the committee is going to be crucial to the next steps. And if there's a major shift in there, I know I've seen some churches have some success with giving people permission, like when that thing launches, we've got clarity about what we're going to do, what we're responsible for, that when that thing launches, everybody's given permission or given the opportunity to say yes or no to carry on and what they're doing there. So that may, it's not the perfect way for everybody, but that may be a way you can move forward as well, is that then we've come together as a group and we make a commitment as a team that this is how we're going to move forward. And spend time then reevaluating as it's being beta tested in the process. It's huge. It's it's not going to be perfect from the get-go.
I think it's important to have goals for the committee. Like, why does the committee exist? Has it done what it's set forth to do? And it sounds like you still have a lot of work to do. And so I would encourage you all to sit down as a group and say, all right, friends, we have this committee. We've done some brainstorming. As a result of that brainstorming, what now are our ministry goals? What should we be working toward as a group? And from those goals, you should develop your benchmarks. And from those benchmarks, you should develop next steps. Those next steps are the things that are going to give you traction in moving forward to get to the goal that you all say is worth your time and effort, et cetera. And so I think next steps is really what they should be focusing on. And those next steps should be determined at the meeting. And you should be given deadlines. And all right, who's going to take this step? Who's got that monkey? And by when will this step be handled with the deadline? And that's really kind of, I think, where you find traction is by assigning those steps and then each month reporting back and saying, okay, where are we? What's the progress that we made? And if somebody isn't doing it, this kind of goes back to Pastor Jeff. If somebody isn't consistently following through on the commitments they said that they were going to, well, then that means it's time for kind of having that open, honest conversation about whether or not this committee or this ministry is really where they should be. Maybe there's a different ministry or something that they would be more joyfully serving in that would benefit everyone. And so it's just kind of like that accountable piece and having open and honest conversation with people about the commitments they're taking on.
That makes me wonder too, then, if some of that was in place, like if there was a purpose and a goal for forming the committee, and that some of their goals that they established to help gain traction need to go back and be a reflection of why the committee was formed to start with. I'm not sure what that reason was, but that may be a good place to go back as they're drafting a job description.
So there you go. There's just a little bit more about committees, but feel free to continue asking us questions. If we can't talk about it on the podcast, we're happy to engage with you either via a phone conversation or email, etc. And so I would just encourage you to consider, continue asking questions. We also want to hear some of the things that you guys feel like you're doing well and you want to celebrate. Or maybe you have an idea about a podcast theme that we might be able to incorporate in future shows. So if you have any of those ideas, I would encourage you to reach out and email us.
Yeah, Melissa, how can people reach you then?
Yeah, so you can tweet me at Melissa Rao, or you can send me an email at melissa@ministryarchitects.com. Is tweet me a verb?
Tweet me? It is now.
It is now.
It should be. By the way, I have to say, y'all, before we actually start closing, I might add, you probably don't listen to the very end of the podcast. Most people are going to end at this point, but if you're still with us, I would encourage you to listen to the entire until the podcast is actually over, because at the very end, every single time, and it just brings me so much joy, our Vice President of Consulting, Jeff Dunrankin, has this amazing laugh, and he laughs every single podcast at the end because Brian just puts it in there. So I just want to say, just keep listening and your day will be edified.
Perseverance. Yeah.
That's right. Persevere.
Yeah. I'd love to hang out with you. Come hang out with me over at my blog, 12stonespirituality.com, or you can email me at steven@ministryarchitects.com, and also author page over on Facebook. So I'd love to chat with you.
Yeah, and you guys can follow up with me at bryant@ministryarchitects.com. If you are watching on YouTube, I think right down here is a subscribe button. We would love it if you would click that little thing. And if you're listening on audio, probably on an iPhone or an Android, there's a subscribe button there too that you can click. We would love for you to do that and encourage you to do that. Thanks so much, Stephen, Melissa, for fielding these questions. And folks, if there's a question that you just want to bounce around kind of individually, don't hesitate to even put that in the email too. We would love to call and chat with you about your specific things that you're facing as those questions come up. So feel free to do that. In about 15 seconds, you're going to hear Jeff's laugh. So hang in there for that. Melissa, Stephen, thank you so much again for being with us this week.
Thanks, guys.